Round one. Ready, go! Knockout! Round two. Ready, go! Knockout! Round three. Ready, go! Knockout! Round one. Ready, go! Round two. Ready, go! Round 3. Ready, go! Knockout! Round 1. Ready, go! Knockout! Round 2. Ready, go! Knockout! Round 3. Ready, go! Knockout! Round 4. Ready, go! Knockout!
Better run home to Mama now.
Round 1. Ready, go! Knockout! Round 2. Ready, go! Knockout. Round 3. Ready, go! Knockout. Round 4. Ready, go! Knockout. Round 1. Ready, go! Knockout. Round 2. Ready, go! Knockout. Round 3. Ready, go! Ring out.
あなたにはクンフーが足りないわ。
anticipating is going to be too far off from that. You know, if you do the $400 price point, that seems to be more in line with this pricing structure, more so than if the system was $450 or $500. If you're losing, you know, it's kind of like a Walmart situation. It's kind of like a big box retailer situation. When video games go on sale at Walmart and only Walmart, the reason they go on sale is because they're taking a loss on those games. Unless it's an MSRP, a manufacturer setting a, you know, a worldwide sale or something like that. Like Square Enix comes out and says, okay, this specific game is now $20. If they don't do that and their MSRP through Square Enix is still $40, and Walmart themselves decide to sell it for $20, they're selling it at a loss. The mindset is to get people into the store, because when you go to a Walmart, you have to walk all the way to the back of the store in order to get video games. So you might see something else as you stroll back there, or you might end up picking up another game or something like that where they can recoup some of the money. That's how physical video games and the distribution of them kind of works, especially with new video games. Profit margins are razor thin on new video games. So the whole mindset is, that's why when you go into a GameStop, they want you to buy used stuff. They want you to get accessories. They want you to get, you know, protection plans, because they're not making money on the new games. So I almost wonder if this is a situation kind of like that. And I think if we didn't have like a paper trail of individuals who are like, yeah, you know, I've pre-ordered things at lower prices from this place before, and they honored it. You know, they came through. It was delivered at that price point. It becomes a lot more interesting. I don't think that the system is going to be $380. Like, that doesn't make sense. That there's no logic in that. That's a weird number. If you know anything about the pricing structure of things, $99.99 is what they like to do. $399.99, $449.99, $499.99, $380 is just a weird number, and you don't see many products come in at that. Maybe $379.99, but obviously, you know, Nintendo's going to want to maximize revenue out of this. My whole mindset is, though, if you're talking, you know, when it comes to a $500 system, let's say the system does end up being $500 or something like that, would you rather sell one thing at $500 or two things at $400? You're going to make $500 selling one thing, or you sell two things for $400 and you make $800. Now, of course, there's cost and, you know, how much you put into it and, you know, what it costs to manufacture the product. But at the end of the day, $800 is more than $500. So you're essentially making more profit on the back end of things by selling in large quantities instead of smaller quantities. So I don't know. I don't know. I just, you know, it seems like you could pre-order if you're in Italy. So, you know, if you're where my family is, San Lorenzello. I'm not saying that right, but if you're in San Lorenzello and you want to order one of these and then send it to your boy, like, you could do that. Like, we are estranged family members. You don't know me, but you know my grandma. She used to run that village over there. And my family still goes there all the time, and like they go and like they just like walk into people's houses, like, oh, you know who I am? This is my father, blah blah blah, and like they just eat. But I find this situation to be interesting because I don't think, you know, I don't think the 370 or 379.77 is going to be the price, but I do think it's going to be 400. And the fact that they're already taking pre-orders for this, like, you could take a pre-order for anything, realistically. I mean, how long have people had, like, Metroid Prime 4 pre-ordered from Amazon? But the whole benefit of the pre-order is getting locked in at that pre-order price point. Because if it ends up being cheaper than what the product actually goes for, some retailers will actually honor that. And it seems like this is a retailer that does honor it. And if they are honoring this, I can't imagine we're talking about $500 for this system. But, you know, it's all speculation right now. It's all just speculation, and that is the fun, that is the joy, that is the beauty of having to wait until April 2nd. Let me know in the comment section down below. What do you think about this? What do you think about the price point? And what do you think the system's going to cost? I mean, really, that's the biggest conversation right now. What is a price point you are comfortable with? If you say anything less than $400, you're going to be waiting a while to play the new system. And as always, guys, thank you for checking out this video. If you're new to the channel, make sure you hit that subscribe button. Be sure to like, comment, and share. Hit the bell as well. And as always, I'll catch you guys on the next video. Later.
Hey guys, Metal Jesus here, and I am back with a quick video giving you my thoughts on the Nintendo Switch 2 reveal that happened this morning. I wanted to get a video out really quick about this because, can you believe it? It finally happened. After years of speculation and rumors and leaks and all this stuff, we finally get an official look at the Switch 2, and I've got quite a few thoughts about this. Now, I'll be honest, when the original Switch was released back in 2017, I was skeptical. You know, I didn't know if I wanted a hybrid system, a system that would be both a handheld and a dock, but it turns out that the original Switch is one of my favorite consoles of all time. It's a awesome system. And because of that, over the years, I built up a pretty sizable Switch game collection, and so I have a vested interest in, you know, the Switch 2 and what it's going to bring to the table. Today's reveal is lacking in a lot of technical information. However, we can get a pretty decent idea as to what to expect. The first one being, it's going to have a bigger screen and also bigger Joy-Cons. And it appears that this is going to have an 8-inch display. That's up from a 6.2-inch display on the original. And I have to tell you, that's good news for me. The thing is, I'm getting older, and so having a larger display is something that I very much appreciate. You know, I'm having to wear readers every once in a while when I'm using stuff, and so just having a larger display, I think, is the right move. Also, too, you know, they originally had a Switch Lite, and that only worked in handheld mode. You couldn't dock it, and I never really liked that very much. Again, I didn't need a smaller Switch. I always wanted a larger one, so I'm glad that we're getting one. But let's go ahead and talk about those Joy-Cons. So they're doing a big change here. Instead of having those rails that you slide in and snap, you know, that was the big marketing thing that they always did with the original Switch, was that snap, right?
Go!
Well, it appears that these are going to be magnetic, and that's pretty interesting change there, because immediately I think, okay, this is going to be sturdy in handheld mode, where they just are, magnetically snap in. But, you know, it's Nintendo, and so they're obviously going to test it a lot, so that's an interesting change for sure. However, they have this mouse mode, which I think is pretty interesting. So essentially, on the bottom of the controller, you can see there's a little optical cutout there, kind of like a mouse, and they show it actually moving around like a mouse, which is unexpected. Having that option all of a sudden gives you the ability to play PC-like games or control games like a PC, right? So you could do like first-person shooters in this mouse mode, which I think a lot of people prefer sometimes. Also, controlling games like a mouse, especially, you know, some strategy games and things like that, having that option, that actually could be kind of cool. So now that I think about it, that actually is a pretty cool little option. So it's going to be interesting to see what they do with that. However, I think the big question for a lot of us is, are they going to finally address thumbstick drift? That was a huge problem with the original Switch. Specifically, you know, those thumbsticks would start drifting after a while. And, you know, I ran into this, Reggie ran into it, pretty much everyone who owns an original Switch would eventually run into, you know, this drifting that would happen. And so that is one of the worst, or, you know, most problematic parts of the original Switch, and I think we're all going to be curious to see if they use Hall effect sticks. That gets rid of that problem, and so I assume that Nintendo is going to do that. They didn't talk about it here, but I'm going to be looking to see if they do that eventually, you know, or when this finally comes out, or they give us a little bit more details about it. I would like to see them specifically talk about that and how they fixed it for the new, you know, Switch. And then finally with the Joy-Cons, I do like how they're sticking with the red and blue theme on those. And, you know, I always like that look of the very first version of this. And so it's kind of cool that they're sticking with that for now. Obviously, going forward, they'll probably do a lot of different colors and themes. And, you know, they'll do a Zelda version and a Mario version. But I like how they're sticking with red and blue. Getting back to the main design of this, it looks like it's slightly more rounded. I think that's a good move on their part. It just looks more modern that way. I did notice that on the top of the device there is an additional USB-C port, so that's kind of interesting. just to have probably more options in the future. I'm not entirely
Round
sure
one.
what Nintendo would have planned for that,
Ready,
but
go!
again, having more USB-C ports is always a good thing, and it kind of makes it a little bit more future-proof. I also noticed that there is a headphone jack, a physical headphone jack in 2025. Definitely becoming a thing you don't see as often anymore, but you know what? Again, more options here, more support for different types of connections,
Knockout.
and it's nice to see a physical headphone jack.
One pack of
Round
Ben's
two.
original, one pack of
Ready,
Ben's.
go!
All original recipes.
Excellent! Round three. Ready, go!
They gave us a look at the kickstand, and you know, no radical changes here. Not much you can do with the kickstand, although it does appear that it's going to support more viewing angles. So that's cool
Ring
if
out.
you have it, you know, on a table with friends, or maybe you're traveling. You know,
Round four.
You just have a little bit more options
Ready,
with that kickstand.
go!
That's a good move. And then they give us a little bit more information about backwards compatibility with previous Switch games. And this is good to see. So basically, it's going to support both physical and digital Switch games. Yes, that's great, especially for collectors like me. However, they are saying that not every
Round
game
five.
will work.
Ready,
And, you know, a little
go!
asterisk there. And that's to be expected, because from the leaks and information that we've gotten so far, you know, this is using a much newer, obviously 10 years newer technology from NVIDIA to create the Switch 2. And in doing so, there's challenges with backwards compatibility. It'll be interesting to see just
Mission accomplished.
how much of an issue this is. How many games aren't supported? You know, if it's like a small percentage, if it's 1 or 2%, I'm okay with that. You know, if it's like 30% don't work, that would be a problem. It's going to be curious to see if this is really just running emulation for Switch 1. I think that's probably possible. And if that's the case, then they can update that as they go along. And also, you know, developers could patch in fixes for the Switch 2. So going to be keeping an eye on that, especially again, since I have so many original Switch games. I would like them all to work in a perfect world. And obviously this is going to be a more powerful handheld. Again, no specific details at this time, but there are estimates that put this just below the Xbox Series S when docked. So if that's true, that's impressive. I mean, I think that's going to be kind of what we expect here. This has a new NVIDIA chip that supports upscaling as well as ray tracing. So it's a little bit future-proof in that regard. The upscaling, I think, is going to be the key here, especially in handheld mode. Well, probably also in docked as well. It's going to allow those games to run at an internal lower resolution, but then use upscaling to make it look better on the display. And, you know, this reminds me of kind of what M Classic did with the original Switch, where if you bought that device, it essentially would kind of do that. It would upscale and, you know, add anti-aliasing and some of those sort of things. And I think that's just gonna be built into this Switch 2. And the other thing I noticed that is kind of interesting is that, you know, this is the first time that I'm aware of that Nintendo has used a 2 in the follow-up console, right? In the name of a console. You know, in the past, they've always done the Super Nintendo, the Game Boy Advance. You know, they didn't call it, the NES 2 or the Game Boy 2. So I thought it's kind of interesting that they're using a 2 here. It's not a big deal, but it does show the importance of the original Switch, that they didn't come up with something silly like the Wii U, right? That was a terrible name at the time. I'm glad to see that they didn't try to do something with the follow-up to the original Switch here. Although, to be fair, I wouldn't have, complained or minded if they would have called this the Super Switch or the Switch Advance. I think that would have been kind of a nice little nod to the past. But yeah, I just wanted to kind of throw that out there. And then some things I'd like to learn going forward, in a future, Nintendo Direct. Obviously how many original Switch games will work day one. They didn't show hardly any games running on it. They only showed a new Mario Kart game, which is cool. Again, that's going to be a day one purchase for sure. But I would like to know, can games be patched later? I assume they probably can. The other thing I'd really like to know is, will the Switch 2 support video out when in handheld mode, like pretty much every other modern day handheld? This
Round 1. Ready, go! Knockout! Round 2. Ready, go! Knockout! Round 3. Ready, go! Knockout! Round 4. Ready, go! Knockout! Round 5. Ready, go! Knockout!
This is especially nice if you're traveling, right? And so, you're in a hotel room. The fact that the original Switch doesn't do video out from the handheld itself, you need to bring the dock or maybe some third-party adapter, is kind of annoying. And so I'm really hoping that they build that into the new Switch 2. Also, we need to know battery life. We want to know how long the battery is going to last. I assume it's going to be like the original Switch, which is fine. And then also real world, performance numbers. How do these new games, how are they going to look? How are they going to run? That sort of thing. Some people are saying that this is more powerful than the Steam Deck, which is good and, possibly to be expected, right? The Steam Deck is a couple years old, so I'm glad it's not, using really old technology. But I would like to know, can modern AAA games get released on the Switch 2 and run decently? That would be pretty cool. But as you can tell, I'm very excited for the Switch 2. I am a big fan of the original, and I'm really excited to see that they're going forward with physical games. That's important for us collectors. And yeah, I hope to get one day one and possibly even go to one of these events that they're going to have, where they're going to do a hands-on event. So we'll have to see what happens. But anyways, guys, love to know what you think down in the comments below. What did you think of the Switch 2 reveal today? Are you going to pick one up? Are you on the fence about it? Let me know. All right, guys, thanks for watching.
Hello there. It's January the 16th, 2025, a date that will be long remembered. We finally have the reveal of the Nintendo Switch 2. And obviously we've got some reactions to the content that was shown. Joining me to talk about it, first of all, John Linneman. Hello.
Hey, Rich. It's a momentous occasion today. I think we've long been waiting to talk about this officially.
And here it is, all 2 minutes and 21 seconds or whatever of
Absolutely.
Switch 2.
And of course, Oliver Mackenzie. Hello.
Yes, Rich, calling it a reveal might be a bit generous. Or even a little bit insulting to the concept of reveals, I suspect.
Well, you're in luck, Oliver.
Round
They call it
one.
a first look trailer.
Ready?
Oh, okay.
Go!
Okay. Well, it does move into this question from Abadabba King Boy With You, saying, the Switch 2 was revealed some minutes ago with a 2-minute trailer. Were you disappointed by the reveal? How do you plan to fill a 1-hour podcast with any talk and questions about such a short reveal? Well, who knows? We're about to find out. Let's move on to the first topic. And, well, basically the vast majority of the 2 minutes that we had to look over concerned essentially the new format to the machine and some of the new features of the Joy-Cons. Yes, so
Knockout!
what are the reactions to this? I mean, we've got this question here from Andre Service,
Round two.
supporter. But from an
Ready?
industrial design
Go!
perspective, the Switch 2 really doesn't move the needle. Is anyone else concerned that the average consumer won't notice the change? Is that the point? What do you think about this?
I'm not. I feel like in this day and age, the actual look of the device is ultimately less important than it used to be. Because fundamentally, for the Switch concept to work, it needs to be mostly screen, right? Which it is.
Yes.
And there's only so much you can do with that. And this is where the colored highlights come in. And I think this kind of
Knockout!
coming on as like a slight differentiating factor for this one.
Round three.
But I feel
Ready?
like that's
Go!
the look of the machine is one of the reasons, along with the Wii U fiasco, that Nintendo opted to is simply attach the numeral 2 to the name. That's why it's called Switch 2. It's very easy to parse. The average consumer will see, oh, Switch 2. It's going to be written right on the back of the console. And I think that's really all
Ring
you
out!
need. Because, I mean, again, you look at the world of phones, there's barely anything happening with design there anymore. And even within the same family, you know, iPhones look the same for like
Wow.
3 or 4 generations
It was ridiculous.
before they slightly refresh the design, right? And it doesn't have really a negative impact on sales. I think this will be well known enough. I mean, already people that I know that aren't super into the gaming industry necessarily and the game stuff were already sending me links like, oh, did you see this, John? I know you're into those game things, you know? And they're sending me links to this reveal. So like, I feel like the news is spreading fairly quickly and people are like, oh yeah, that's Switch 2, not like the new controller for the Wii U, which definitely caused confusion at the time.
Right.
So
Yeah, absolutely. Oliver, what do you make of this? You've been taking a look at some of the finer details of the reveal there.
I have. Well, I have to report that it looks a lot like Switch 2, or at least Switch 2 as we understood it from the many weeks, or maybe even months here of leaks dating back to last September. We do get firm confirmation on a few features, though, like there are those little indents in the bottom for the dock alignment. We had that with Switch 1 as well. Here they return, unsurprisingly. You get these pretty substantial vent holes in the bottom that are covered with kind of like this mesh grill, presumably for airflow, to have air flow through the system from the bottom, instead of like on other Switch units, they're more oriented towards the back bottom corner. Now they're at the bottom of the unit there, which could also have some implications for the dock and its potential fan, although we didn't really get a good look at that in this footage. There's a large fan grill on the top with 3 segments, which cover what look like little heat sink fins there. So that presumably is part of the cooling system there. There's an SD card slot on the left-hand side of the unit. It looks like if you zoom right in when they're opening up that kickstand, you can just see the faintest little kind of corner wedge there where the daughter board is for what we presume is an SD Express slot there. So that would certainly line up with prior leaks. And there's a top USB-C in addition to the bottom one. They highlight that in the trailer, but they don't highlight what it's for or what it could be for. Possibly it's just for charging. Maybe it has some kind of use with other peripherals. We don't know that yet. There are some other details too, like the thumbsticks have a slightly wider outer edge to catch your thumbs a little bit better. There is a button on the right-hand side of the unit, on the right-hand Joy-Con, below the D-pad there, which is a C button. People are calling it a C button, but it's not labeled here. So I would suspect that in the future that will be a labeled button, but maybe in this render they're just not labeling it for keeping up suspense purposes. They will reveal that at a later date, perhaps during the Direct itself. And the Joy-Con cradle no longer has the curved holsters for the controllers. Instead, it's got a flat surface there. So just a couple changes. But I think the big change, and the change we were talking about in the Slack earlier, is that there does seem to be some kind of mouse functionality here. Because you get that little interstitial of the controllers gliding with their straps trailing behind like a mouse. And the little Joy-Cons themselves have these little rubber pads that looks like these rubber pads that make contact with whatever kind of flat, hard surface you're doing the mouse gliding on. And it keeps that Joy-Con plastic from actually contacting that sliding surface. So to anyone who's not familiar, I'll just show you a little Joy-Con here. You can imagine moving this along with a little mouse sensor there and clicking this. It's kind of like a mouse. That's basically what people have been reporting and have been speculating on ever since it was revealed. There's a little sensor here, looks like kind of an optical sensor. So Nintendo kind of leaned into that by showing the mouse in a very mouse-like configuration with that trailing Joy-Con strap. So I suspect strongly that they're hinting at that functionality there, essentially.
Interesting. So an interesting design choice, because fundamentally, how many times when playing Nintendo Switch are you basically playing near a hard surface? You know, you've got to be basically on a tabletop or something like that. So
tabletop mode's for.
Yeah, but it's quite a limited use case scenario.
It could also have
quite
some
interesting,
special utility in certain games. Like we have Super Mario Maker, obviously. That's a game that could lend itself really nicely to mouse input for moving things around. You have titles like Advance Wars, obviously strategy games that could play into it as well. Also, you might have 3D builders for levels that might be hard to navigate with a trackpad, or might be hard to navigate with a controller rather. Like you can imagine, maybe hypothetically speaking, like a 3D track builder for Mario Kart.
Round one.
That'd be a lot easier
Ready?
to use if you had
Go!
for building for console, basically. So I think that's the kind of angle Nintendo could approach it. But I would agree that in general, it's not a very useful mode. It's definitely a special purpose.
I feel like the larger shape of the actual Joy-Con themselves should at least allow it to be more comfortable, and it actually does seem like it could be usable in this configuration. Because I feel like the original Joy-Con are just a little bit too thin and small.
Round two.
For this sort
Ready?
of, like,
Go!
But during that mouse section, something else caught my eye with that little. So they attached that colored piece on the edge, which they've always been doing. And we've talked about this potential for a magnetic lock system, which, as opposed to the rail system. The rail system on Switch being somewhat flimsy, right? It didn't
Round
actually
three.
click into place.
Ready? Go!
Directly in the system in the same way that you might hope. So there's always this little bit of a leeway to it, but it never quite felt as solid as you would like. Here, they very specifically, you'll notice throughout, they keep going, clicking them into place and then unclicking them. And they have a new sound effect associated with it, which I think will become the new branding, like switch click noise that they do. But during the mouse section, if you see on top, they just have a simple little
On the
colored button on
battlefield,
that
you'd be
slide on
dead.
piece, or the click on piece. I'm wondering if that's just like a magnetic release button, essentially. And I'm curious to see how these connectors end up working, because if it is like magnetic based, you'll have to essentially disengage it to pull them apart, right? And also, how solid will it be? And along those same lines, so there's this magnetic lock system, which hopefully will fix the flimsiness of the Switch. And two, of course, they kind of showed off the new joysticks on each of the Joy-Con. And I think we can hope, at least, that they've moved to sort of more of a Hall effect style stick this time around. Because I don't know if they ever actually really acknowledged the Joy-Con drift issue, but they certainly never solved it. That continues to plague the Switch to this day. Much to my chagrin, I found out the hard way, actually. I've had some recent Joy-Con failures. And by the way, I mentioned that I swapped the casing shell and had the color wrong. Some Discord members and other members of the community pointed me, there's actually an app you can use to reprogram the color of Joy-Con on the current Switch, which is a fun thing to note. If you're somebody that had to replace it due to a bad joystick, you can change the color. But hopefully that won't be necessary on the Switch too. And then lastly, on the Joy-Con side, you notice when they zoom in, this is a CG render, of course, but I feel like they paid very close attention to showing the surface of the plastics. And I feel like the actual texture of the plastic stands out in this trailer in a way that suggests that it has changed. To me, it looked more like the black plastic you would see on, say, the Steam Deck, with small indentations in it, like a small rough pattern to give it sort of a textured feel, whereas the current Joy-Con is just like a smooth plastic feel. I'm okay with that, actually. I think that's a good move. And the overall design of the system, while it certainly resembles very closely the original Switch, I feel like that new materials, the new color highlights, and everything kind of helps it look pretty sharp. It's a very neat, clean looking design that feels suitably upgraded while still, channeling that original Switch design.
Mm-hmm.
Modern businesses function on a foundation of integrated SaaS applications. The software services you use to drive day-to-day operations enable you and your teams to work efficiently and effectively. But with any complex system built on a web of assorted solutions, the risk of losing sight and control is all too real. The pitfalls of SaaS applications, shared ownerships across app owners and cybersecurity, unique requirements and configurations, potential threats, and unknown access can leave you vulnerable to breaches from the digital void. You need to continuously assess the health of your SaaS estate to keep the dangers of digital sprawl in check. This is the...
Yeah, I guess another thing we don't know anything about is the screen. We're presuming it's an LCD panel.
Based on leaks,
Yeah, and also the size wasn't really emphasized within that asset. I mean, it is going to be very, very large comparatively compared to what we're used to.
Yes.
And I guess the original Switch in turn was larger than we were expecting from a Nintendo handheld. But I guess it is what it is for various reasons. Oliver, thoughts on that?
I think the leaks had it pegged at about 8 inches, but in this trailer they show 2 Switch units, an original Switch unit and a Switch 2 unit side by side. And the scale looks a little bit different there. Maybe it's like 8.4 inches roughly if you do the size comparison there proportionally. But I'm not sure if that's to scale. So,
did you guys notice how handhelds are actually sort of, they're both increasing in size yet shrinking? And what I mean is, like, when I first saw the Steam Deck, it felt immense. But when I look at it now, my brain has become used to this size and it no longer has that feeling. I look at it just like, oh yeah, that's a normal size. But then when you hold up something like a PS Vita again, you hold it in your hand, you're like, man, this thing was tiny, but it's actually not tiny. Like, it was huge compared to the PSP, which then you hold that and you're like, man, this is small. But that 4.3 inch screen was gigantic in 2004. And so, like, it's weird how our perception of size is shifting. And I feel like if Nintendo had done like a near 8-inch screen back in 2017, people would have gone insane. Like, what are they doing? That's way too big. And maybe it is still too big. We'll see. But people have become used to these larger devices, right? That's what's happened, because the Steam Deck is now small compared to some of the other PC handhelds that have hit. So I feel like with the slim form factor of the Switch 2, it'll feel kind of like average size, even though it's probably huge.
I don't know what to make of that. Obviously, the Portal is a similar sized screen, and it is absolutely huge. But then again, they've basically bolted on a gigantic DualShock controller, cut in half, which is a completely different story here. Yeah, I mean, we're going to talk about some of the other content that was within the trailer, specifically Mario Kart, obviously, or Mario Kart. The backwards compatibility. We'll also talk a bit about the leaked clock speeds that appeared earlier on in the week. But before we do that, I just want to talk about, I mean, this is kind of weird for a reveal. It's kind of weird to have a reveal that's relatively light on details. The first half of it is essentially confirming all of the physical form factor leaks that we've seen over the last few weeks and going back into last year. And not much beyond that, except to say, hey, we're going to have some live events and a new direct like 2.5 months from now, which in terms of the gap is like gigantic. Do you think that basically the leak was forcing Nintendo into doing something, John?
I actually am not convinced that that's the case, because the timeline's sort of, they're actually shorter, I think, than when we first saw the Switch, right? The Switch was also revealed in a very similar type of trailer format, where it was just a short showcase of things. We actually saw more in that trailer than this one, of course, but absolutely. That was because they had to sell what the Switch concept was, because it was brand new. Now people know what the Switch is. That's nothing new. So they're just like, here's the Switch. Here's more of it, basically. And everybody's like, oh yeah, I know what this is. It's the next Switch. I think this trailer is exactly equivalent to that one. And if you recall, there was also like a 2 or 3 month window between the initial reveal and the first big event showcase that they did. And that's exactly what they're doing here, which leads me to believe it was probably always part of the plan. I feel if they had been more reactionary, we actually would have seen it earlier, like last year even. Or, this doesn't feel rushed. This just feels like Nintendo doing what Nintendo does and sort of announcing it as they probably originally planned, maybe? I don't know.
Yeah.
It is hard to say, but does Nintendo react? They usually don't react to things like this, I feel.
Although there was a certain like joy and levity to that original Switch trailer with all the people using the Switch in different environments. And also they did show off a number of titles like Breath of the Wild and Skyrim and Mario Odyssey. All games that were
Mario
not
Kart
previously,
as well, I think.
Yeah, all games that were not previously announced, obviously for the console that did not yet exist. So that was all very exciting to see, and it was just showing you kind of the Switch as a lifestyle product as well as a game console. I feel like, and here it's just kind of like, well, it's just kind of a sterile render and some game footage. It's not as exciting.
Like I said, though, it's because we know what the Switch is now. They don't have to sell the concept anymore. But you're right; it is not as exciting for sure.
Yeah.
Well, some might argue that you do have to sell the concept that this is a next generation device, and I don't think that happened.
That's a good point, Rich. But I feel like it's enough to get the buzz. It's not like I feel like there's nobody that's going to see this trailer and be like, "Oh yeah, that sucks. I'm turned off by the Switch 2. I'm not going to pay attention anymore." Like, how many people would actually do that? Like, there is more info coming. So
absolutely, just have to wait a relatively long while until it arrives. But let's move on. Obviously, there was a second component to the reveal, which was, well, some actual gameplay of the new Mario Kart game, which I presume is number 9, right? Oliver, been taking a look at this one. It's interesting, right? Because if you're going to be making a next generation showcase, probably not the game to do it, but at the same time, if you want to reveal a crowd-pleasing title, probably can't get much better than this one. But what were your sort of technical takeaways of the presentation?
Yeah, well, I mean, ideally you'd have both here, but in this case, I feel like you only have that crowd-pleasing element to it. So from my perspective, it very much looks like Mario Kart 8 from a rendering perspective, and I've played like maybe 100 hours of Mario Kart 8, so I have some experience here. It has very similar looking character rendering. It has visible aliasing. To my eyes, it looks like no AA, although the quality of this trailer is very low. But if you look at certain things like little tiny single pixel lines, power lines, things like this, it looks super jagged in this trailer. It's not resolving coherently. It doesn't look like compression to me, so just does not look super clean. Probably not using DLSS of any kind. So much for all those leaks. I mean, I'm sure the console will have DLSS, but this game does not appear to be using it at the moment. There are some improvements, slight improvements, I'd say. Like, they're using shadow maps for the environments. It looks like all the environments are using shadow maps here. All the environmental geometry is using shadow maps, whereas before they used a mix of a lot of pre-calculated shadows and some real-time shadows for things like overhead lamp poles and things like this, like things that are close to the track. They cast shadows onto the player cars, and they would actually have shadow maps. But here, it seems to all be using shadow maps. In terms of stylization, the particle effects look very cartoony to me. It almost looks a little bit, tiny bit reminiscent of maybe something more in the lines of Super Mario Wonder or something like that. Like the fire that goes out of the exhaust when boosting is especially stylized. It's got this multicolored look to it, this blue and orange look to it that looks quite nice, I think. Whereas Mario Kart 8 was a little bit more generic, not as bold, not as exciting there. The cars have, again, a bit of a stylization to them. They have this big rounded look. They look less realistic than Mario Kart 8, which had some higher detailed textures to the cars, to the carts. Also had some like wheels that were more squared off and a little bit more realistic looking. You had like even some Mercedes vehicles in that game that was not a super cartoony looking title. And the characters, it's hard to get a super good look at the characters in this footage.
Round one.
Donkey Kong.
Ready?
Design,
go!
movie design there. And Princess Peach seems to have a bit of a wider face. Again, like the movie, but this footage is very compressed, so it's hard to see exactly to what extent it is. But it does look like it might be a little bit different there. And also, there's some interesting expressiveness. Something that really stand out. Like there's a big Mario expression in one moment, which is kind of a squash and stretch animation, and that
Round two.
is not only
Ready,
on Mario,
go!
but extending to his cards. So the card is squash and stretch as well. He did it to Mario, but in Mario 8, the cards were relatively relatively have this expressiveness to them necessarily.
Excellent.
There's also some gameplay things I can touch on, but for
Round
now,
three.
that's basically like
Ready,
my impression of the
go!
graphics and rendering. I think probably on an original Switch, at least with some substantial degree, maybe with lower resolution, maybe with more shadow costs, things like that. So I suspect it could be a cross-gen title, at least where it originated as such, because I'm not seeing a lot of Switch 2 rendering tech here necessarily. Obviously, the absence of DLSS is especially ridiculous, and it's a little bit weird for that first initial title to be shown on Switch 2, to not have that technology present. But yeah, in terms of rendering it, it is fairly similar to
Round
Mario
four.
Kart 8, just with a bit of a different emphasis on stylization, and I expect a bit of a more expressive feel, a bit more of a bold feel. That's the impression I'm getting from this trailer.
Seems like they support a question from Alex Fire. Gentlemen, to my eyes, the in-game snippets looked quite enhanced. The part models were much more detailed and the lighting looked significantly improved in the zoom-ins. I've got that MK8, it's got the MK8's design language. Closer to the movie styling from the Mario movie last year. As a launch title, we suspect baked lighting or some minimal ray tracing. Exclamation point. Well, I'm presuming baked and no ray tracing.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. I mean, there, there's a lot of real-time shadowing in this trailer, actually, but I would suspect no ray tracing. To me, it does not look a world apart from Mario Kart 8. Perhaps there's more polygons in there. Again, it's a little bit hard to say given the quality, brevity of this particular trailer segment, but to me, it does not look a world apart from Mario Kart 8, except in scale, but we can touch on that in a moment.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. I mean,
exactly.
John, this represents a really interesting dilemma for Nintendo, right? Because, they sold untold millions of the last game on the standard Switch. You've got a game here that looks as though it could scale to the standard Switch as well. Do you think we're looking at cross-gen here? Do you think, because if you think about the financials for this, the amount of money that they've the amount of money they've invested in the new game, and, can you lock out 150 million users from the sequel?
That's a very difficult question, actually, because this gets back into the whole traditional console argument of new software drives console sales, right? So there is this risk that you release a game like this on the original Switch that people just shrug and stick with the original Switch. But at the same time, to be fair, they've done this sort of cross-gen stuff multiple times in the past, though obviously when going from a less successful system to one that would become a success with like Zelda, both times actually, where you had Breath of the Wild also on Wii U, and then you had Twilight Princess also on GameCube. That sort of thing is certainly feasible, but man, it's tricky because I really feel like Mario Kart is such a popular series that it is the type of software that drives console sales. And that's why I think it could actually be exclusive, because if you look at the sales data for Mario Kart 8 Deluxe, it is a game that has continued to sell. It doesn't drop off. It just keeps on selling over and over and over again. So it's not like, oh, we need to sell as many copies as possible on day one, and then it drops off like a lot of games these days. This is a game where, like, I think as new people get into the Switch 2, they will buy this game with it, and it will just continue to sell throughout the entire generation. And as a result, that's why I think it's probably okay to just release it on Switch 2 for that reason, right? Because then it's just encouraging people to get into the new system. I already think we're going to have Metroid Prime 4 as a cross-gen game, but I don't think Metroid is nearly, we know it's not nearly as important a series as Mario Kart to the greater audience, so, but I really think that this could end up being Switch exclusive for the Switch 2 exclusive because of these long-term sales potential that is very unique to games like Mario Kart, Grand Theft Auto, and the like. There are not many games like this.
Yeah.
Yes.
One thing I would say here, though, that could possibly make this Switch 2 exclusive, or at least would be leading in that direction to some degree, is there are some very notable gameplay changes here. Like, if you look at the very start of this little snippet, you see little starting grids, right, for all the cars. And there are 24 starting grids, right? So possibly 24 cars on track. That's certainly what it would seem to indicate, whereas prior Mario Kart games, well, Mario Kart 64 and earlier Mario Kart games were a little bit different, but certainly in Mario Kart 8, you have 12 cart slots. You have up to 12 carts.
Double.
So yeah, that would represent a doubling of the amount of carts on track. Also, you do seem to see a very large track that's quite long with some side paths that's rendering out pretty far into the distance with some 3D models there. You also have some interesting things like a little burger shop off to the side of the track that you can possibly go through. Yeah, the Yoshi burger shop thing that might have a little power up or a pickup in it. One thing that's also showing up here is the players seem to take a detour because a section of road is blocked off by a divider. That could possibly indicate that we're going to look at tracks that change from lap to lap, like we did in the booster course tracks in Mario Kart 8 Deluxe. So to me, it seems like the scope could be larger. I would hope this isn't like a Forza Horizon Mario Kart, as John was talking about earlier.
That was actually my first thought.
Yeah.
And I'm not sure that they're going to do that because it would kind of kill the pick up and play nature of it. But what if it was more like a Diddy Kong Racing, where you had, you know, sort of an exploratory element as well? You know, I think that could be fun.
I'm certainly open to it because I feel like they perfected the earlier Mario Kart formula to a large degree with Mario Kart 8. I am super excited because I love Mario Kart. I love this series. I'm excited what they're doing with this possibly gameplay wise. But technically,
Round
in a
one.
lot of respects, it seems like more of the same,
Go!
so far, I would suspect.
I just the size and scope of what they showed in this trailer, and just I really feel like this is going to be something different. There's going to be a twist that we don't know yet, because like you said, Mario Kart 8 Deluxe affected that formula, and with so many DLC tracks, there really isn't any further room to go in
Round
that
two.
direction. They can't just do
Ready?
that. I mean, they
Go!
could technically do it again, but I feel like that would be kind of boring. I don't think it would get the critical acclaim or attention that the series is known for. People are expecting some sort of shift because Mario Kart 8 itself was based on Mario Kart 7 for 3DS, right? That was that generation of Mario Kart, and then it was built from there. And I think it's time for a change. And you get that large scale environment. Not sure what they're gonna do with it yet. There's potential.
And one last thing I would note here before we head on is that there's no
Round three.
sections on this
Ready?
track. There's also
Go!
no action sections in this track. Those are both key elements that came in from Mario Kart 7, were continued and expanded in Mario Kart 8 with the anti-gravity sections. The Mario Kart 8 courses are very vertical. They have lots of loops, lots of twists, lots of crazy sections, underwater sections. Again, this is just a tiny snippet of one track, but we're not seeing that there. So perhaps they're shaking it up a little bit. Who knows, right? But certainly there is some indication that maybe a few things have been shifted and changed. Maybe there's a bit of a different scope. Maybe there's a bit of a different stuff.
Go!
Okay. I want to see you go after Sonic Transformed. Kart racers. The whole idea of like having boats, flying vehicles, and race cars all in one game, switching between laps, and of course leveraging all that classic IP, which Nintendo is known to do. That would be awesome.
Fair enough. I think Sonic in the car is basically like God needing a starship in Star Trek 5. But let's move on. Another component of the 2-minute video was essentially that we got clarification on backwards compatibility, which has been very, very important discussion point for years now, basically since the Switch 2 was mooted. Would it run your existing library of games or wouldn't it? Now, we kind of thought back in the day that it had to, in the age of the digital library that moves with you across the generations. And we got confirmation of that. In fact, we actually got a little segment in there which has got lots of text, lots of asterisks, and proper clarification of what's actually going on there. So, basically, this little graphic here reveals that yes, there is backwards compatibility. No, not every game will be supported, but they'll tell you about that at a later date. The physical cartridges and digital purchases are fully compatible with the new machine, which we were hoping for and kind of had to be really. If you've got to be all in basically with a system like this. John, what's your reaction to this? It's kind of like a bit of a no-brainer, really. I think the biggest thing for me, or from that graphic, was assuming that is a to-scale representation of the two machines. The Switch 2 really is rather large, but I digress. Backwards compatibility, thoughts?
Well, my first thought is relief.
Yes.
You know, there have been those rumors circulating around, and sometimes there's truth to that stuff. And I was genuinely concerned that they wouldn't go this route, but I think we kind of expected it nonetheless. And thankfully, it's confirmed. The fact that they say not all games are supported or fully compatible, they say, does make me wonder about the nature of this. And like, are they? I guess the big question I think we're all asking ourselves is, are they going to allow it to run at the higher clocks and essentially leverage the performance of the machine, as is the case with PlayStation 5 and the Xbox consoles? Nintendo traditionally shies away from doing this, unfortunately, but maybe things have changed, and I'm wondering if that plays a role there. We really just don't know yet, but clearly they have taken this into account. They understand the Switch user base is gigantic, and I feel like not supporting classic Switch games would have been a huge problem for Nintendo going forward, and would have dramatically hurt sales in the long term, or especially. But yeah, just see the thing about this slide that really gets me, like you say, is like the comparison of the two units, assuming that they're to scale. It also kind of highlighted how the way the Joy-Con attached, it looks much more flush in Switch 2 versus Switch 1 when you see them side by side like this. And it's very interesting. That is a significantly bigger device. But it also made me wonder, so they show two images of a cartridge here, right? Sliding into that slot. And we've kind of wondered about the cartridge stuff as well, since obviously Switch 2 games will be shipping on carts again, which is confirmed here. But what does this mean for what kind of media will the new Switch use in terms of like speed of flash memory, for instance, on these cartridges? And are there any other changes to the cartridge pinout itself? Like, this is still stuff I'm curious about. Will they be the exact same shape? Or will they store the 3D in the little tab like they did on 3DS, where it was the same shape as a DS cartridge, but they tucked that little tab there? That's where all the 3D stereoscopic stuff was hiding, I think. And then, of course, on that same note, what will the Switch 2 cartridges taste like? Are we going to have a taste test to see how they compare to Switch 1?
A hint of strawberry, possibly.
I would like
possibly
that.
Probably
not.
bitter.
Probably bitter.
Yeah.
Any thoughts on this, Oliver?
I mean, I'd echo some of those comments for sure. I think hopefully they're just referring to things like Nintendo Labo games lacking compatibility, where they require physically a Switch 1 Joy-Con to fit into that cardboard construction there. There's also games that use the IR sensor. So on the right-hand Joy-Con, I got it right here. There's a little IR sensor there. And that IR sensor does not seem to be present in the Switch 2 Joy-Con, Switch 2 right Joy-Con from these images. Again, this is just coming out today, but I don't think it's present there, and that would preclude its use in some games that have like mini games that use the IR sensor or use it for heart rate functionality, things like that. I'd also kind of alternatively hope maybe that if it is a more significant problem, that it ends up being like the PlayStation 5 backwards compatibility, where Mark Cerny somewhat concerningly came out in, I think, March of 2020 and said, we recently took a look at the top 100 PlayStation 4 titles as ranked by playtime, and we're expecting almost all of them to be playable at launch on PlayStation 5, which was
all right.
Slightly ominous. Certainly, I was of the impression that, okay, it's going to work for like popular games, but unpopular games, it's not necessarily going to be there. And of course, they only ended up with like 11 games-ish that were not playable on PlayStation 5, and then a small number of games, like I think Shadow of the Colossus, a few others, that had significant issues on PlayStation 5, but were still very much playable. So hopefully it's somewhere in between maybe, but hopefully it's more towards that earlier category where you have games that just require a Switch 1 Joy-Con in some capacity with functionality or a physical presence that is not perfectly replicated by the Switch 2 Joy-Cons. And so that's causing them to lose backwards compatibility in those specific titles, but it doesn't apply broadly as a kind of like software issue. That's what I would hope.
Yeah, my gut reaction to it is exactly that it's basically not so much a software issue as a hardware issue. You know, if they're a machine which for whatever reason they haven't fixed to the new one, that's obviously going to have implications for the small amount of games that use those features. And similarly, there may be a small amount of games that are just causing problems from a compatibility perspective for whatever reason. But I don't think it's going to be too much to worry about. In terms of whether we're going to get speed boost, I mean, this is a question which we asked time and time again in the Q&A section, and I guess my answer to that hasn't really changed. There's two ways they could do it, I guess.
Round two.
Support
Ready,
at the hardware
go!
level, or they can approach it from a software perspective. You know, you've got the NV1 API. Are they just going to run the new games under that API on the new hardware? You just naturally run faster because the GPU is so much more capable. That's my thought on it. I think the move forward in actually supplying extra horsepower is
Ready, go!
Than to basically produce a carbon copy of the original device, which in itself had small variations in performance. You know, the revised Marico chip had different memory attached, lower latency, show research, which produced a slightly different performance profile. So yeah, I'm expecting that there probably will be a quote-unquote boost. I don't know whether they're actually going to capitalize on that by, you know, 30 FPS caps or whatever. It's too early to say. We kind of need to see the machine and to get to know the backwards compatibility there before we can really comment further. But let's move on. We've talked about the trailer, and we're now going to be talking about a leak that occurred a day or so prior to the trailer coming out. Now, obviously, back in the day with Switch 1, we knew that there was a Tegra X1 within it. We didn't know the clock speeds, and Digital Foundry was the first to reveal that. We're not really interested in doing leaks and stuff like that anymore, but other people appear to have now revealed the clock speeds that the Switch 2 is operating at. And there are some interesting points being raised here and some puzzles which we need to get to grips with. Oliver, do you want to take point on this one?
Yeah. So there's two, or I guess three sets of leaks here: the GPU clock, the CPU clock, and the memory. So yeah, the GPU clock here is reportedly 561 megahertz handheld and 1007.3 megahertz docked. And I think on the surface that seems kind of reasonable, but I kind of assume that there'd be a bigger delta between those two numbers personally, because the Switch 2 has some pretty beefy cooling, and unless they're deploying a lot of that power portably, then a margin of basically less than a 2 times increase there does not really seem like that would justify the increased cooling. And again, unless that portable mode is really pushing on the thermals there. Because with the Switch 1, you know, the stock clocks had the portable mode at exactly half the frequency of the docked mode, up from about 40% pre-launch, where it was at 307 megahertz, I believe. So that is a little weird, but none of that is too unexpected. Like, the clocks themselves don't look that crazy. Looks probably within range what you'd expect for an 8nm chip of this size and variety here. The thing that is causing people to get tripped up, though, is the CPU clock. So as reported, we have in handheld mode 1108 megahertz in the CPU, and then in docked mode it's 998.4 megahertz. So that's weird for a number of reasons, right? It's low. The clocks are pretty low, but not crazy low. Again, remember, this is an 8-core CPU on an 8nm process, and also the Cortex A78 cores that are being used here are, a larger cores for mobile device. Certainly in mobile phones, what you tend to see is a configuration of 4 of these cores, plus some additional low power cores. So to have 8 of them in a configuration where you're not boosting or suppressing that frequency dynamically, like the PlayStation 5 does, maybe 1 gigahertz is actually not that unreasonable. Sort of in that range, 1 gigahertz is not maybe that unreasonable. The really weird thing, of course, here is that you're seeing higher CPU clocks in portable mode than docked mode. If you were to expect any divergence there, certainly you'd expect it to be bigger in a higher number in the dock mode rather than the portable mode. And I kind of ultimately suspect here there's something going on that we don't understand. Maybe some CPU cores are disabled in the portable mode for battery reasons. Maybe there are some other frequency modes in this CPU that are not being exposed at the moment to the leakers. I would suspect there's something going on here because just on the surface level, it really doesn't make a lot of sense, even if the clocks aren't like that far from where I would expect them to be necessarily. The actual divergence in clock speed there almost just flat out doesn't make sense. I couldn't imagine that on a face value being correct here. I think there must be something going on that we don't yet understand fully.
Yeah, I tend to agree. Of course, it could just be an error.
Yeah,
that's the thing. I mean, I think we should stress there's been no confirmation it's an 8 nanometer chip, but the evidence does kind of suggest it. And the other thing, of course, is that these clock speeds kind of suggest it as well because they're lower than you'd expect. What can I say about this? Yeah, so we're basically looking at a difference. I mean, the docked mode has like 79.5% more clock than the mobile, which is a lot. It's a wider gulf than there was with Switch 1. Memory bandwidth, which is crucial for a mobile device, is like basically 50% higher when docked. So there is a pretty meaty gulf there between handheld and docked performance. The CPU side of things, yeah, that's tricky. I mean, obviously the original Switch had a locked 1 gigahertz clock, and that was the same for both portable and docked play, and that kind of made sense, right? It basically said that the game will operate the same depending, regardless of whether you're playing handheld or docked, but you'll get a graphics boost when docked. That kind of makes sense, right? So the difference there, I'm inclined to agree with you, Oliver, that there's something that we're not aware of here. Maybe it is a battery life thing, thermals, who knows? We just don't really know. So yeah, that's kind of
Round 1.
Mystery.
Ready?
In terms
go!
of whether we believe this stuff or not, I'd say that the GPU side of things definitely looks quote unquote plausible. Same with the memory bandwidth side of things.
Excellent.
I'm also reminded, looking at the absolute precision of the
Round
clock
2.
speeds being mentioned
Ready?
there.
Go!
I'm reminded of the Switch 1 leak that came from SDK documentation, where that was similar process. What I would say is that if you were going to fake this, that CPU stuff would be an instant red flag. And if I was going to fake it, I would basically not do that, because that's already casting doubt, making people ask questions, which if you're faking
Round 3.
something is the last thing you
Ready?
want to do.
Go!
So I'm inclined to believe that this is kind of plausible. The GPU side of things, 1007.25 megahertz, just over 1 gigahertz. I'm reminded of the RTX 2050 laptop tests I did, which has, I think it 2048 CUDA cores versus 1536 in Switch 2, according to the leaks. I was running that
Round 4.
750 megahertz.
Ready?
It's actually quite
Go!
interesting that you kind of end up with much the same level of theoretical performance between that DirectX 2050 and the specs that we're seeing here. So do take a look at that 230 videos. It might be quite valuable for looking at graphics performance perspective based on the Ampere architecture, because we're not seeing a huge amount of it in this reveal trailer. And I guess it's going to come down to the live
Round
events
5.
further on down the road.
Ready,
And of course, the
go!
Direct, where we're actually going to get to see a bunch more games and get a greater understanding of what it could actually do. I think in terms of what we did see, obviously there's been a lot of discussion about DLSS. It's going to be a game changer for Switch 2, but there's no obvious evidence whatsoever that there's DLSS being used in Switch 2 Mario Kart 9 there, based on what we saw, or any of the sort of next generation features which the Ampere architecture can deliver. So that in itself is quite interesting. What do you make of all of this there, John?
Wow, yeah, you guys said a lot on that, and I tend to agree. And I'm siding with this being somewhat accurate, given that there's some relatively conservative numbers, and like you said, the CPU numbers specifically being strange as they are the last thing you would want to put in a faked leak, in the sense that it would just draw more attention to it, right? As it is now.
Yeah.
It seems decidedly very Nintendo in that sense, that there's got to be a reason behind this selection. I mean, I'm obviously happy. I mean, we knew it would, but seeing significantly more memory bandwidth compared to the original Switch, just because that was such a bottleneck for the system.
Mm-hmm.
But dropping it significantly between handheld and docked, so I guess there's rumors that the screen is 1080p this time.
Yeah.
We don't know.
Yeah.
I'm not sure that that's actually a wise choice on their part, if it's the case. I know it sounds like that you'd want that, but I still think 720p is pretty good for this size. And also maybe like 900, I don't know. I feel like 1080p might just be a little bit too much, because it does increase battery life, and it also puts more of a strain on things like memory bandwidth and the GPU, which creates potential bottlenecks in handheld mode. And if we're thinking that, again, there's no evidence of DLSS being used yet, but we know that the architecture is capable of it, one would have assumed then that they would leverage that more for docked play, but with lower base resolutions, like 1080p, for instance, or lower even.
Yeah.
But if the handheld is also already a 1080p screen, I don't know. There's that kind of stuff I'm still curious about. So we'll see how that plays out. I'm also pretty convinced now that this is probably 8 nanometer, as you've been kind of saying all along, and hopefully everybody's ready to.
There's no real. It's just kind of like, how can I describe it? Occam's razor, the most plausible.
No, so that's the thing, right? It's like, that's just the Nintendo way. And based on those previous motherboard leaks we've had, and kind of looking closely at the sizing, it kind of checks out, right? And like everything's sort of coming together. Yeah,
I think the way that we'll eventually figure it out is that either an outfit like Tech Insights, who basically looked at the original SoC and basically confirmed it was a vanilla Tegra X1. I hope they do the same thing.
I hope they did the same thing here.
Yeah, we should also have a pretty good idea of efficiency simply by looking at the capacity of the battery and comparing it to battery life. We'll get an idea of power draw at that point. So, yeah, that will be indicative as well. I just want to tackle a few supporter questions before we wrap up. And there's obviously a lot of questions that we had. I've picked a couple about DLSS. This one from Peter Karadimas. Hello, crew. Will the Nintendo Switch 2 be capable of using the new transformer model of DLSS recently revealed by NVIDIA? And if you saw our DLSS 4 video, you'll see what that actually means, which is essentially that NVIDIA has basically thinks they've taken their old DLSS as far as it can go, and they're using a much more complex form of machine learning in order to produce far superior results. I mean, Oliver, I remember sharing the B-roll with you, and you were quite impressed by the transformer model.
Immediately, yeah.
The question is whether it could be used on Switch 2, and obviously it could be, right? Because it's got tensor cores. It uses the Ampere architecture. Ampere will be is being used in Switch 2, rather. The question is really, DLSS in its standard form with the convolutional neural network is already quite computationally expensive, and the transformer model will be more computationally expensive. So whether it's used or not is basically going to be down to whether the ability to scale from even lower resolutions outweighs that cost. That's my thought on it. But obviously we've got patents from Nintendo talking about actually producing a lightweight model of DLSS, which is presumably compared to the existing convolutional neural network model. What do you reckon there, Oliver?
Yeah, I mean, NVIDIA's quoting it to us as being 4 times more compute intensive than the old CNN model. So I don't really know if that's compatible with the Switch 2 necessarily. Not in terms of, obviously it's compatible on some level because it can work with architecture.
It's the practical use of it.
But is it practical? I'd suspect that Nintendo would probably be looking down the path of, can we get a lightweight version of DLSS working even if we're compromising on quality? Rather than going down the approach of, we want to maximize quality and use this model that, keep in mind, is really designed for more modern GPUs that are in laptops, in desktops, right? We're not talking about something like a super low power, 2-generation old Ampere mobile GPU, basically the equivalent thereof. So yeah, I suspect probably not. But I mean, who knows? Maybe if there's like a super lightweight transformer model that they could use, maybe that's what they're going to use, but I'm not necessarily seeing the link there at the moment.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I am tempted to get hold of another 2050 laptop to put this transformer model through its paces on there. I guess we'll see whether that happens or not. This question from NG Subby. I basically want you to confirm or adjust your take on what DLSS could do in the Switch 2. I primarily play my Switch docked, and to say it doesn't look great on a 4K TV is an understatement. My biggest hope for the Switch 2 is looking decent on a 4K output. I think it's the sentiment we all share, right, John?
Yes.
Do you think with the Mario Kart reveal there that we actually gained any evidence? I don't think we did. That
no,
the 4K output could be any better.
Quite the opposite. That was a 1080p upload, and this footage was never full screen, but aliasing was still visible, which is not a great sign, I would say.
Yeah.
But it's also, that's just Nintendo, man. For whatever reason, they're just addicted to this no AA look that they go for, right? Like, they just can't stop. Like, there's plenty of games on Switch that have decent anti-aliasing, but Nintendo games are not one of them. And the few times they tried, they put freaking FSR1 in there.
Yes. In terms of confirming or adjusting your take, again, I'm just going to point you towards the T239 video because my opinion hasn't really changed. Assuming they're using the convolutional neural network, which is used in the PC version, of which there is no, confirmation whatsoever, it seemed to be very, very usable for upscaling 540p to 1080p. And I think that looks kind of okay. You can get a look at that video and see how DLSS looks, and indeed how it looks on a 4K screen, because it's upscaled to 4K, that video, I believe. But until we actually see Switch 2 with DLSS being used in a game, there's not really too much more we can comment on. This question from Anxiously Chronoed figured, hi DF crew, can we expect Nintendo to release free performance patches for old Switch games to run better on Switch 2? The fact they mention and show Switch games running on Switch 2 in their revealed trailer gives some hope they won't be releasing paid remasters. Or have I inhaled too much
I would not want to be in here right now. Look at how tight this is.
There's certainly been a lot of hopium and copium surrounding Switch 2 over the months and indeed years. John, what do you think about this? Free performance patches.
When did I say?
On the one hand, the fact that they've got a digital library now that persists across generations means that the concept of remastering prior generation games is not really on the table anymore. But on the flip side, patching them certainly is on the table, you'd think, right?
It is indeed on the table. But this creates a predicament for Nintendo because they have indeed, as they suggested, released many games from prior platforms on the Switch. But it made sense there because the Wii U specifically, where they've been pulling most of them from, was a failure, and a lot of people didn't play those games, and so they were able to just bring them over while developing other titles alongside them. That's kind of gone at this point. They've used everything up, and I think the audiences would not react kindly to re-releasing again, taking Switch generation titles,
Round
and
one,
new versions. And I'm
ready,
not sure Nintendo's going to take
go!
Either. And like you say, now that patching's possible, they might offer it, but it's really difficult to say. And just knowing, can you really see Nintendo being like, yeah, we're gonna put out a Tears of the Kingdom patch that lets it run at like 60 FPS or something, like just like that. Like Nintendo has never once in their entire history done anything like that. It's not to say they won't do it.
Round 2.
Yeah.
Ready,
You do expect cross-gen
go!
titles.
Yeah, I think we can cross for sure. And it'll just be like, I don't think it'll be a case of like buy one everywhere. Almost certainly, I imagine. Especially given the limitations of the and the cost that entails, right? But I don't know, man. This Nintendo hasn't really done anything like this before. Like this has been established now for a while, but compared to
Round
other
3.
consoles, Nintendo
Ready,
hasn't had a generation
go!
shifted over in a way where it's fully compatible with the previous gen in a way that it's integrated into the new OS. Right? When they did Wii compatibility on Wii, for instance, or it was always a kind of separate off thing. Like, oh, you bring it to Wii OS in Wii mode now. Or even with GBA games.
Round
like when
4.
you're playing GBA games
Ready,
on like the DS,
go!
You don't have access to all the functions of the hardware. It kind of locks you into different modes and such. And that's traditionally what they've always done. And so this is the first time we actually have a scenario where you could be playing natively Switch games on the Switch 2 directly from the Switch 2 OS. So,
Well, we do have a little bit of here that Nintendo was apparently demoing a high-resolution,
Round 5.
high-frame version of Breath
Ready,
of the Wild
go!
on Switch 2 development hardware. I kind of tend the direction. I think there are a lot of things that are a little bit tricky here because it just does not seem very much like Nintendo. But I think that what Nintendo could do is they might offer paid conversions to Switch 2 version. I wouldn't be surprised if they were to go through their older library, release full-fledged Switch 2 versions of kind of classic titles like Breath of the Wild, and get those games running in good form on Switch 2, and then offer some kind of fee for a conversion to that, maybe not a full price. I think that might be a reasonable way for them to balance those priorities.
Similar to the Sony $10 upgrade fee.
Yeah, similar to that upgrade fee for titles like Horizon Zero Dawn to Horizon Zero Dawn Remastered, right? Those kinds of upgrade titles, or The Last of Us Part 2, for instance, The Last of Us Part 2 Remastered. I could expect something similar here, but it is a tricky thing to tread. I just suspect that Nintendo will be in a position, especially over the first few years of the Switch 2's life cycle, where some of those older titles will look very attractive to get a remastering treatment and to possibly bring people on board to Switch 2 in a way that maybe new titles would not. I suspect that will prove too attractive a prospect to just leave in the dust, but I also think you can't really sell a new $70 game to people who played that game 7 years ago. So I think there are some things that need to balance there.
I mean, if you think about the strategy behind Sony's $10 upgrade fee, it's pretty straightforward. They want to view their library of games as being essentially evergreen, and one might consider that Nintendo's games are far more evergreen than the likes of, Horizon Zero Dawn. And the way to continue that evergreen trend is to basically upgrade the games to run and look better on the new hardware. So yeah, there's pros and cons to this particular discussion, I think. But it certainly would be a new direction for Nintendo. But if they can't, remaster everything from their prior libraries anymore, this might be their preferred route forward. We just don't really know at this point. Let's sum up. We've just about reached. Reached the hour point that
that's what I was going to say.
Point Wii U was saying we couldn't do. So we have done it. But let's sort of wrap up. I've got to say, one thing which did surprise me and disappoint me a touch was basically the quality of the asset that they put out for the reveal of this monumental piece of hardware. 1080p video, a mixture of 30 FPS and 60 FPS components. It wasn't particularly great, was it, from a production perspective? But I guess it did the job, right? Millions of views. People seem to be excited about it. Any final thoughts from you there, John?
Oh man, There's just, well, first of all, one of the big exciting things for me, it's not announced, nobody knows anything, but I'm anticipating it, is a new game from Shinen, the small indie developer in Munich. They traditionally love to arrive on new Nintendo platforms with something, and they've clearly been cooking quietly for a while. Their last game, The Punch Win, as it was called, was awesome, but they did The Tourist, they did Fast RMX on there. So what could we get on the Switch too? That's actually one of the things I'm most excited to find out. But yeah, no, I'm very excited for the hardware, and I'm also now very curious about when it's going to release, given that they announced a direct date at the very end, coming April 2nd, which was so much later than we expected that we were like, wait, is the date format reversed? Is it actually February 4th? Because it seemed like, wait, they're doing April? But they're doing April, as we know. And so what does that mean for the release? Is this going to be a fall console now? Or are they going to be able to quickly spin it out for summer?
Well, they've got events happening in April, May, and June, depending on where you are located geographically in the globe. So one might assume that the machine probably won't be released until June at the earliest.
Exactly. So it's really... Would they do a straight summer release? I mean, there's just a lot of questions there that I still have, and I'm excited. We've been waiting for this for a while. I guess the last question I have is, what are the leakers gonna do? Like this Switch Pro, Switch 2 leak? It's
round one
been, for them,
ready,
like a lifestyle
go!
for the last like 6 years, and now it's over. Like it's the release. Like I guess they gotta start getting ready for Switch 3. Switch Pro 2.
Well, you know, there's always the old faithful, like extra GPU in the power brick and the dock.
Yes.
You know, there's a lot.
We didn't even talk about the dock, by the way. I like the new shape. It's cool.
Round
but
2.
I noticed when they showed it playing Mario
Ready,
Kart, they had a single,
go!
very thin cable conspicuously hid the power adapter there.
All right.
Any final thoughts from you, Matt?
No, I mean,
Ring out!
it's not really the reveal that I expected, to be honest with you. I was hoping for something a little
Round
bit more
3.
full-fledged.
Ready,
in this style,
go!
possibly the original Switch trailer, although I totally take on board the point they don't need to sell that concept as much. Just showing us some CG renders, a little cheap, and also at this point, you know, you can have that console out in public and people can use it in some way. It's basically all been leaked already anyway, so no risk of your advertising possibly leaking it. But I think personally, I don't have to put money on it. I think that's the release in July would be my expectation. Just looking at the schedule of these events,
Round 4.
and the schedule of their direct,
Ready, go!
I suspect that would probably be the case. I'm hoping that we hear more from third parties though in the interim, because now they actually can announce regulars, presumably. Although some of them I imagine will be waiting for that April showcase, but I hope that we'll see some material, possibly, or at least some announcements from third-party developers as to what titles they're going to bring on board the Switch 2.
Knockout!
But yeah, I'm super excited for it. I hope it launches sooner than later here, and I'm certainly looking forward, hopefully, to a pretty busy summer with the Switch 2 software.
Absolutely. I guess one more point. This reveal was somewhat different to the Switch 1 reveal, not just in terms of content, but also in terms of supporting material. Obviously, back in the day, there was a statement from NVIDIA, Jensen Huang, saying, hey, we're now collaborating with Nintendo. This is like a really big collaboration that's going to last years, and there's nothing from NVIDIA this time around. Quite amused by the press kit that was sent out to journalists, which was password protected, and you get into this zip file, and it's 2 JPEGs, which you know, was awesome.
Yes.
So you know they're certainly holding their cards to their chest there. I think
that they are.
It's fair to say, and basically left us hungry for more, which I guess is fair enough, right? But that's it. That's the end of the show. Please do like, subscribe, share on the off chance that you did enjoy it, with bells and notifications and algorithm boosts for our content. Store.digitalfoundry.net for all of our merchandising wares. Switch 2, I'm sure there'll be more leaks I guess we'll be discussing them at some point. And we're really looking forward to this Direct and the upcoming events. But for now, from us, that's it. Thanks for watching and supporting Digital Foundry.
Round one. Ready, go! Knockout. Yeah. Round 2. Ready, go! Knockout. Round 3. Ready, go! Knockout. Round 4. Ready, go! Knockout. Round 5. Ready, go! Knockout.
もう一戦やりまひょか。